The smell. That's the first thing that hit me. It wasn't the good, clean smell of Texas earth after a midnight rain. It wasn't the scent of hay and worn leather I'd come to know as home. This was a sour, cloying mix of cheap perfume and expensive champagne, the unmistakable smell of entitlement. And then my headlights cut through the dark and I saw it. My vineyard, or what was left of it. Deep, ugly ruts carved through my life's work like scars on a man's face. Dozens of them. They crisscrossed and mangled my Pinot Noir vines. The delicate, difficult plants I'd poured my soul and most of my savings into. A year of back-breaking labor, a year of hope, ground into the mud under the wheels of somebody's late-model BMW. The rage came, of course. Hot and fast, the kind of primal anger that makes you want to break something. But then, something else took over. A quiet, cold calm that had been drilled into me over 15 years in the Rangers. Breathe, assess, act, don't react. So I didn't scream. I didn't kick a fence post. I put the truck in park, pulled out my phone and turned on the camera's flash. I started walking, my boots sinking into the ruined earth. I documented everything, every crushed vine, every empty bottle, every single tire track. And that's when I saw it, snagged on my barbed wire fence like a final insult. A silk banner, flapping gently in the breeze. In gaudy gold script, it read, Sterling Estates Annual Charity Gala. Sterling Estates, of course. And I knew exactly who was behind this. Victoria Sterling, the self-appointed queen of the HOA next door, and my own personal welcome wagon from hell. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't some kids having a joyride. This was a message. This was a declaration of war. She had just made a terrible, terrible mistake. She thought she was poking a quiet farmer. She didn't realize she was waking up a soldier, the old Jack Callahan, the kid who left this very ranch with a head full of romantic notions about serving his country. He might have stormed over to her marble-fronted mansion and given her a piece of his mind. He might have shouted. He might have let that white-hot rage boil over into a mess of yelling and threats that would have only ended with him in the back of a squad car. But the man who came back from Kandahar, he knew better. The man who had learned the hard way that the loudest man in the room is often the weakest. He had a different playbook. In a firefight, panic is a death sentence. And this I realized, looking out over the wreckage of my future. This was a firefight. It just hadn't started shooting yet. My mind went quiet. The roaring in my ears faded, replaced by a crystalline clarity. My training took over, not the part that teaches you how to handle a rifle, but the part that teaches you how to handle a crisis. Breathe, assess, act, don't react. You see, this ranch, it wasn't just dirt and vines to me. It was supposed to be my peace. My grandfather bought these 200 acres back when land was cheap and a man's word was his bond. He passed it to my father, and my father passed it to me. It was the only constant in my life, the anchor that held me steady through 15 years of sand and shouting and watching good men die for reasons that got fuzzier with every passing year. When I finally came home for good, all I wanted was quiet. I wanted to feel the sun on my back and the dirt under my fingernails. I wanted to build something, not break it. I wanted to coax life from the stubborn Texas soil instead of taking it on some godforsaken hillside halfway across the world. So I took a gamble. I poured my savings, my disability pay, everything I had into a dream. A small experimental vineyard of Pinot Noir. Everyone said I was crazy. Too hot for Pinot in Texas, Jack, they'd say. They call it the heartbreak grape for a reason. It's fragile. It's finicky. It needs constant attention. Maybe that's why I chose it. It needed me, and Lord knows I needed it. That trip to a viticulture conference in Napa I'd just come back from. That was supposed to be the final piece of the puzzle before my first ever harvest. This little plot of land wasn't just my inheritance, it was my redemption. And Victoria Sterling had just driven a fleet of luxury cars right through the middle of it. I'd known she was trouble from the day she moved in. She was the driving force behind the Sterling Estates development, a collection of beige mini-mansions that had sprouted up like fungus on my northern border. She was the kind of woman who wore brilliant white to a barbecue, with a smile that never quite reached her cold, calculating eyes. She didn't want a neighbor. She wanted a subject. As president of the Homeowners Association, she immediately began a campaign of polite harassment. I wasn't even in her HOA. My land was deeded long before her little kingdom ever existed, but that didn't stop her. First came the letters, on thick, creamy stationery. A notice that the color of my mailbox was not on the approved community palette. Then, a complaint about my unapproved agricultural equipment being visible from the road. My personal favorite was the formal grievance about my rooster, General Patton, crowing outside of designated quiet hours. I ignored them all. I saw it for what it was, a probe. She was testing my defenses, seeing how far she could push, because she didn't just want me to be a compliant neighbor, she wanted my land. I'd heard the whispers. Her grand vision for Sterling Estates included a private 18-hole golf course. My 200 acres were the missing piece. The 18th hole. She wanted it to have a sweeping vista right where my farmhouse stood. My view. So what do you do when a predator in pearls decides she wants your home for her playground? Call the sheriff? Marcus is a good man, a friend, but this was a civil matter. He'd take a report, shake his head, and tell me to get a lawyer. File a lawsuit? That was her game, not mine. She had a team of slick attorneys on retainer. They'd bury me in paperwork and motions until my vineyard was long dead and my bank account was even deader. Number, you don't fight a battle on the enemy's chosen ground. You don't play by the enemy's rules. You create your own battlefield. You set your own terms. The law is slow. It's methodical. It's civilized. And what had happened here was not civilized. Justice, I have learned, sometimes needs to be a little more immediate. My land, my rules. The thought was so simple, so pure, it felt like a revelation. I went back to the barn. The air was cool and smelled of hay and motor oil. It smelled like sanity. I climbed aboard my two old friends, my John Deere 4020, a machine my grandfather bought new in the 60s, and an old rust-red Massey Ferguson combine harvester I'd picked up at an auction. They weren't pretty, but they were heavy. They were real. There was no shouting, no engine revving in anger, just the steady, powerful groan of old steel as I drove them out under the pale Texas moon. I parked the John Deere diagonally across the main entrance to my long gravel driveway. Then I drove the Massey Ferguson up behind it, blocking any chance of going around. Together they formed an impassable canyon of rust and faded paint. A fortress gate. The final touch came from a can of white paint and a large piece of plywood. My hands were steady as I painted, not with fancy letters, just plain block capitals. No room for misunderstanding. I hammered it to a fence post right next to the blockade where no one could possibly miss it. It read, private property, unauthorized parking, vehicle release, fee, $200 cash. All donations will be forwarded to a real charity. Then I went back to the house, put on a fresh pot of coffee, black, strong, and sat on my porch in my grandfather's old rocking chair. The sun was just starting to tint the eastern sky with shades of orange and purple. A cool breeze rustled the leaves of the big oak tree in my yard. It was quiet. The watchful stillness of a sniper in a hide, waiting for the target to walk into the crosshairs. I didn't have to wait long. Just after 7 a.m., when the morning was still soft and new, I saw the first set of headlights. They bounced and swayed as the car made its way down my long gravel driveway, getting closer and closer to my ironclad welcome party. A silver Mercedes. I took a slow sip of my coffee. Showtime. I stayed put in my rocking chair, letting the gentle rhythm calm the adrenaline that was starting to fizz in my veins. The Mercedes crunched to a halt a few feet from my John Deere's front wheel. The engine cut off, and the sudden silence felt louder than the engine had been. For a moment, nothing happened. I could almost hear the gears turning in the driver's head, trying to process a reality that simply didn't fit into his world view. Finally, the driver's side door opened with a rich, expensive-sounding thump. A man in his late 60s climbed out. He was dressed in a pastel pink polo shirt, pleated khaki shorts that were probably worth more than my monthly grocery bill, and blindingly white golf shoes. His silver hair was perfectly coiffed, and he had the deep leathery tan of a man who spends most of his life chasing a little white ball. He put his hands on his hips and stared at the blockade, then at my little farmhouse, then directly at me. I gave him a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee. "Excuse me," he called out, his voice dripping with the kind of condescending patience one uses on a misbehaving child. "What is the meaning of this?" I didn't answer. I just lifted my chin slightly, indicating the hand-painted sign next to him. He had to take a few steps closer to read it. I watched his face cycle through the 5 stages of entitled grief. First, confusion, as his brain tried to make sense of the words, then denial, as he shook his head slightly as if to clear a bad dream, then anger. Oh, the anger was a sight to behold. His tanned face went a blotchy, dangerous shade of red. "Are you serious?" he sputtered, marching right up to the front of my tractor. $200! This is outrageous! This is extortion! I continued to rock. The steady creak of the old chair was the only sound from my porch. "I am a guest of Victoria Sterling," he bellowed, as if that name were a magic key that opened all doors. "We were at a charity gala. You can't just trap people. This is kidnapping. For cars." I had to admit the phrase was a new one on me. I took another sip of coffee. My silence seemed to infuriate him more than any argument could have. "I'm warning you," he said, pointing a trembling finger at me. "I am Arthur Abernathy. I sit on the board at the club. I know people, powerful people. I will have this heap of junk towed off your miserable property within the hour, and then I will sue you for damages, emotional distress, and illegal imprisonment of a German automobile." He stood there, panting, waiting for me to crumble. I just looked at him, my face as blank as I could make it, and then took one last, long sip of my coffee before setting the mug down beside me. Round 1 was over. He was just the first wave. Over the next hour, it was like watching a domino rally of indignation. A woman in a shimmering cocktail dress and heels that were completely useless on gravel tried a different tactic. She approached, dabbing at her eyes with a silk handkerchief. "Please," she whispered dramatically. "My son, he's asthmatic. His emergency inhaler is in my glove compartment. I must get to it." I'd already thought of that. I was a strategist, not a monster. I finally spoke, my voice calm and even. "Ma'am, I will be happy to escort you to your vehicle so you can retrieve any necessary medication. The vehicle itself, however, is staying put until the fee is paid." Her tears vanished in an instant, replaced by a venomous glare. You're despicable!" she hissed, before stomping back to join Mr. Abernathy in the growing crowd of the disgruntled rich. Next came a young hotshot in a Tesla, maybe 30 years old, with a slick haircut and an air of technological superiority. He didn't yell. He tried to reason with me, as if I were a malfunctioning appliance. "Look, old-timer," he began, walking up with his phone held out as if he were about to pay with an app. "Let's just be logical here. A misunderstanding has obviously occurred. You've made your point. Now be a good chap, move the tractor, and we can all forget this ever happened." "No misunderstanding," I said, my voice flat. "Just a simple transaction." His smile tightened. "You're making a big mistake. A very, very big mistake." He took a step closer and actually put his hand on the front of my John Deere as if he could physically push it out of the way himself. That's when I stood up. I didn't move fast. I just unfolded my 6'2" frame from the rocking chair and stood at the edge of my porch. The motion was enough. He took a half step back. I pulled out my own phone, much older and more beaten up than his, and made a great show of hitting the record button. He saw the red light and his bravado evaporated. He scurried back to the others, muttering about lawsuits. They kept coming. A couple who wouldn't stop talking about their brunch reservations with a state senator. A man who claimed to be a lawyer himself and spouted a stream of nonsensical legal jargon that he clearly learned from television. Each one was a new performance in the grand theatre of entitlement, and through it all I was the silent audience, the unmovable object against which their unstoppable force was breaking. The chaos reached its crescendo around 9 o'clock. That's when the main event arrived. A gleaming black Escalade, so polished it reflected the worried faces of the stranded guests, rolled up to the blockade. The driver, a man built like a refrigerator, got out and opened the rear door. Victoria Sterling emerged. She was dressed in a crisp white pantsuit, looking completely serene, as if she were arriving to cut the ribbon at a new library. She surveyed the scene, the crowd of her angry guests, my iron blockade, and me standing on my porch, with a look of theatrical disappointment. She was flanked by a tall, thin man in a suit that probably cost more than my truck. He had the hungry, predatory look of a very expensive lawyer. As if on cue, a white van with the Channel 8 News logo pulled up right behind her. A reporter and a cameraman hopped out and immediately focused their lens on Victoria. She was in her element. She was in control of the narrative. "It is a truly sad day for this community," she began, her voice resonating with practiced sincerity for the camera. "A day when a simple misunderstanding following a wonderful event that raised thousands of dollars for sick children is met with such hostility. This aggressive and unstable behavior is a threat to the peace and safety of Sterling Estates," she went on, painting a masterpiece of manipulated truth, portraying her guests as victims and me as a dangerous recluse. Some of her guests, emboldened by her presence, started shouting in the background, adding to the drama. The young hotshot from the Tesla, seeing his chance for more screen time, stepped forward and actually kicked the massive front tire of my tractor. That was his mistake. That was the opening I needed. I ignored Victoria completely. I walked down the porch steps and calmly approached the news crew, stopping a respectful distance away. The cameraman, sensing a confrontation, swung the camera toward me. "Ma'am," I said, looking directly at the reporter and completely ignoring Victoria. "My name is Jack Callahan. This is my private property. My vineyard, which is my sole livelihood, sustained thousands of dollars in damages last night from this unauthorized parking." I raised my phone. "And this," I said, my voice still level, "is one of your philanthropists attempting to damage my equipment not 30 seconds ago." I hit play. The screen clearly showed the Tesla owner kicking my tractor tire. The reporter's eyes widened. She immediately turned to the young man. "Sir, did you just kick that vehicle?" The narrative had just begun to shift. Victoria's face was a mask of fury. She had lost control. And that's when I felt my phone buzz in my hand. I discreetly glanced down. It was an email. The sender was anonymous, just a string of letters and numbers, but the subject line read, "A neighbor." My heart started to beat a little faster. I opened it. It was a single image, a screenshot of the official invitation for the charity gala. My eyes scanned the text until I found the line I was looking for, highlighted in yellow. It read, "Ample overflow parking will be available on the scenic, rustic property immediately adjacent to the estate. My property." Her words, proof of intent. A wave of validation washed over me. I wasn't just in the right legally, I was in the right morally, and now I had a piece of paper to prove it. Then my phone buzzed again. A second email from the same anonymous address. This time, the subject line was only one word. Proof. The attachment wasn't an image. It was an audio file, an MP3. My breath caught in my throat. I had a sudden, gut-wrenching feeling that whatever was in that file, it wasn't just another piece of evidence. It was the kill shot. My thumb hovered over the screen. The noise of the crowd, The reporter's questions, Victoria's angry hissing, it all faded into a dull roar. There was only the little icon on my phone. I pressed play. My thumb, calloused from years of work, felt clumsy against the smooth glass of the screen. I held the phone to my ear, turning slightly away from the chaos so I could hear. The noise of the crowd. The reporter's insistent questions. Victoria's sharp, angry voice. It all melted away into a distant buzz. The recording started not with a voice, but with the mundane sounds of a meeting. The distant clink of a coffee cup on a saucer, the rustle of papers, a man clearing his throat. It was disorienting for a second. Then a voice cut through the noise, a voice I could now pick out of 1,000. Victoria Sterling. "And I've spoken to legal," she was saying, her tone crisp and confidential, completely different from the public performance she was giving now. "The county ordinances are on our side regarding nuisance complaints. Once we have enough documentation, the noise, the unsightliness, the traffic from his little market stand, the pressure will be immense." A man's voice murmured something I couldn't quite make out. "Exactly," Victoria continued, her voice dripping with condescending certainty, "but the gala is the key. The damage from the party will be our primary leverage. We'll have 12 residents willing to testify about the unsafe conditions of his property. We'll declare his farm a public nuisance, tie him up in litigation, and acquire the land for pennies on the dollar for the golf course expansion. He's a stubborn old soldier, but even he can't fight a war on that many fronts. He'll be begging to sell within 6 months." The recording ended. I lowered the phone from my ear. My breath was steady. My hands were still. There was no elation, no surge of triumphant joy. There was only a cold, hard certainty, a grim satisfaction. It was better than I could have ever hoped for. It wasn't just proof of trespassing, or a tacit approval of the party. It was a confession, a detailed blueprint of a conspiracy. I looked up from my phone, my eyes finding Victoria in the crowd. She was still arguing with the news reporter, trying to wrestle back control of the narrative. She hadn't noticed my retreat. And that's when I saw them. Flashing lights, red and blue, reflecting off the polished hoods of the stranded cars. A familiar Ford Explorer was making its way slowly down the drive. Sheriff Marcus Brody. He parked behind the news van and stepped out. Marcus wasn't a small-town pushover. He was a big man with a quiet authority that commanded respect. He'd served 2 tours in the Marines before coming home to wear a different kind of uniform. He was a man I'd trusted with my life before, and a man I trusted now. He surveyed the scene with a practiced, weary eye. The blockade, the angry crowd, the news crew, and finally me. "Jack," he said, his voice a low rumble that cut through the noise. "Victoria, what in the hell is going on here?" Victoria saw him and her whole demeanor changed. She saw him not as the law, but as her cavalry. "Oh, thank goodness you're here, Sheriff!" she exclaimed, rushing towards him. "This man has lost his mind. He's holding all of us hostage. He's making threats. You have to arrest him." Marcus held up a hand, stopping her tirade. He looked at me, his eyes asking for an explanation. This was it, the moment of truth. "Before you listen to another word of fiction, Marcus," I said, my voice carrying in the sudden quiet, "I think you and everyone here should listen to this." I walked over to my porch, grabbed the small, rugged Bluetooth speaker I use in the barn, and tossed it onto the hood of the Escalade. I connected my phone. A moment later, the quiet sounds of the meeting room echoed across my front yard, and then Victoria's voice, her real voice, filled the air. "The gala is the key. Acquire the land for pennies on the dollar." I watched their faces. It was like watching a slow-motion car crash. The news reporter's jaw literally dropped. The cameraman, a true professional, instinctively zoomed in, tight on Victoria's face. Her lawyer, Mr. Harrison, went pale, his confident smirk melting away like wax. The crowd of guests grew deathly silent, their own petty grievances forgotten as they realized they were just pawns in a much bigger, much uglier game. But I only watched Victoria. I watched her face shift from indignant outrage to panicked confusion. I watched her eyes dart around, looking for an escape that wasn't there. I watched the color drain from her face as her own words, her own treachery, condemned her in front of the entire world. The recording ended. The silence that followed was absolute. The only sound was the chirping of a bird in the big oak tree, completely unaware of the human drama unfolding below. Sheriff Brody broke the silence. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He turned his gaze, slow and heavy, onto Victoria Sterling. "Mrs. Sterling," he said, the formal address colder than any insult. "Is that your voice on the recording?" That's taken out of context," she stammered, her voice a squeak. "It's been doctored. This is a setup." Marcus just nodded slowly, his eyes unblinking. He took a step towards her. "Well, our forensics team down at the lab is pretty good with doctored audio. We'll let them be the judge." He stopped directly in front of her. "For now, I think we have a lot to discuss. Downtown." He glanced at her lawyer. "Mr. Harrison, you're welcome to follow us." Then he looked back at Victoria. "Ma'am, please turn around and place your hands behind your back." For a half-second that stretched into an eternity, nobody moved. The world seemed to be holding its breath. Even the news camera was perfectly still. Victoria Sterling stood frozen, her face a canvas of disbelief. The idea that the rules, the real rules, could actually apply to her was so foreign that her mind simply refused to process it. Her lawyer, Mr. Harrison, finally found his voice, sputtering, "Now see here, Sheriff, this is entirely unnecessary. My client is a pillar of this." "Mr. Harrison," Marcus cut him off, his voice dangerously quiet. "I suggest you save your arguments for the judge. Right now, your client is interfering with a criminal investigation." He then looked back at Victoria, his gaze unwavering. "Ma, American, now!" That's what finally broke her. The fight drained out of her like air from a punctured tire. Her shoulders slumped, her head bowed. Without another word, she turned and presented her wrists. The sharp, metallic click-click of the handcuffs snapping shut was the loudest sound I'd ever heard. It was the sound of a queen being dethroned. The walk to the squad car was a masterpiece of humiliation. The news camera followed her every step, a silent, unforgiving eye. The crowd of her former admirers and allies parted for her, their faces a mixture of shock, pity, and a dawning selfish fear as they realized their leaderless predicament. Victoria kept her head down, her immaculate white pantsuit now looking like a prison uniform. Marcus placed a gentle but firm hand on her head as he guided her into the back of the cruiser. He shut the door with a solid, final thud. As the red and blue lights pulled away, leaving a cloud of dust in their wake, the spell was broken. The tension that had held everyone in a state of suspended animation evaporated, replaced by a low murmur of confusion and dazed conversation. The news reporter, smelling a much bigger story than she'd anticipated, began trying to interview the shell-shocked guests. The show was over. All that was left was the cleanup. That night, I was the lead story on the 6 o'clock news. They used the footage of me standing calmly on my porch, the video of the Tesla owner kicking my tractor, and of course the dramatic shot of Victoria being led away in handcuffs. They painted my farm as a tranquil place that had been violated, and they painted me not as an aggressor, but as a quiet veteran who had finally been pushed too far. For once, the media got it mostly right. The phone call from Liam Chen, my anonymous neighbor, came around 8. His voice was young, energetic, and filled with a nervous excitement. "Mr. Callahan, it's Liam from the HOA. I sent you the emails." "I know," I said. "I owe you one." "No, sir. We all owe you one," he said, a rush of words tumbling out. "We had an emergency board meeting an hour ago. Victoria has been removed as president, effective immediately. Her access to all HOA funds and records has been frozen. The rest of the board is in full-blown panic mode. They're terrified of the lawsuits, not just from you, but from the residents she lied to about the golf course project. So the rot was deeper than I thought. Her whole empire was built on a foundation of lies. "Why'd you do it, Liam?" I asked. "I bought a house here because I wanted a quiet place to raise my family," he said simply. "Not to be ruled by a tyrant who thought she was building Versailles. She was going to ruin this community. You just stopped her before she could finish the job." The next morning, the real cleanup began. The blockade was still in place, but the atmosphere was entirely different. The anger and arrogance from the day before had been replaced by a grim, resentful resignation. Arthur Abernathy, the golfer, was the first to approach. He didn't look at me. He just walked up to the John Deere, pulled out a wallet thick with credit cards, and sullenly produced 2 crisp $100 bills. "Here," he grumbled, shoving them toward me. I took the money and from a small table I'd set up handed him a pre-written receipt that simply said, "Received $200 for services rendered." He snatched it from my hand and marched back to his Mercedes without another word. I unlocked the heavy chain I had strung between the 2 machines for the night, pulled it aside just enough for 1 car to pass, and watched him drive away. 1 down, 47 to go. They came in a slow, steady stream all day. It became a kind of parade of shame. The woman who had faked an asthma attack paid in silence, her eyes fixed on the gravel at her feet. The young hotshot in the Tesla threw his $200 on the table and sped off, spraying gravel as he went. The couple who knew the state senator quietly paid, their brunch plans from the day before long forgotten. With each transaction, I felt something shifting inside me. It wasn't about the money. I knew from the start that this amount wouldn't come close to covering the cost of replacing my vines. It was about the principle. It was the physical act of them acknowledging a boundary they had so arrogantly ignored. It was the price of admission back into a world where rules and respect for other people's property actually meant something. Each crisp bill was a tiny piece of my stolen peace being returned to me. By late afternoon, only a handful of cars remained. That's when Liam Chen drove up, not in a luxury sedan, but in a sensible minivan with a child's car seat in the back. He got out and walked over, a friendly smile on his face. "Looks like you've had a busy day," he said. "You could say that," I replied, gesturing to the nearly empty field. We talked for a while. He told me more about Victoria's schemes. Her plans to levy huge fees on the residents to fund her golf course, her habit of bullying anyone who disagreed with her. He was just a regular guy, an accountant who had gotten fed up. The audio recording had come from his phone, which he had accidentally left recording in his pocket during the last board meeting. A smart, simple move, a be it kitsch move in its own way. He was elected the new interim president of the HOA at the emergency meeting. "We're going to have to make a lot of changes," he said, looking over at my farm, "starting with our definition of what a good neighbor is." We shook hands. We weren't exactly friends yet, but we were neighbors. And for the first time since I'd come back to Texas, that word didn't leave a bad taste in my mouth. That night, after the last Lexus had paid its due and driven off into the sunset, I walked the perimeter of my land. The silence was back. My silence. The damage was still there, a series of ugly scars on the land, but the violation was gone. The invaders had been repelled. I went back inside and sat down at my old oak kitchen table. In front of me was a large, untidy stack of cash. $100 bills, 50s, 20s. I counted it, $9,600. More than enough to start repairing the damage to my irrigation system at least. But as I sat there, in the quiet of my reclaimed home, staring at the pile of money that had been born from such ugliness, I knew it had to be more than just compensation. It had to be a statement. I sat there for a long time in the quiet of my kitchen, the smell of stale coffee mixing with the scent of sweet victory. That pile of cash on my table wasn't just money. It was a symbol. It was the spoils of a war I never wanted to fight. I could use it to fix the busted irrigation lines, to buy new rootstock for the vineyard, and no one would blame me. It would be just, but it felt incomplete. It felt small. Victoria Sterling had thrown a charity gala. She had used the noble idea of giving to cloak her own selfish greed. She had twisted something good into something ugly. The thought settled in my mind, clear and sharp as a rifle shot. The perfect ending to this story wasn't just to repair what she had broken. It was to untwist what she had perverted. It was to take her tainted money and forge it into something honorable. The idea, when it came, felt so right, so fitting, that I almost laughed out loud. A week later, I made a phone call. Not to my lawyer, not to my nursery supplier, but to the Channel 8 news reporter. She sounded surprised to hear from me. "Mr. Callahan," she said, her voice cautious, "I hope everything is all right." "Everything is better than all right, Mom," I told her. "In fact, I'm planning a small event at my front gate tomorrow afternoon. I think it might be a story your viewers would be interested in." The next day, the scene at my driveway was a mirror image of the chaos from before, but the reflection was different. The same white news van was there, but this time it was parked respectfully on the road. The same reporter stood by my gate, but this time her expression was one of friendly curiosity. I wasn't alone. Standing with me were two people from the Lone Star Veterans Association, a local charity that helped soldiers transitioning back to civilian life, and in my hand I held a single, crisp bank check. When the camera was rolling, I kept my statement short. I wasn't a politician. "A little over a week ago," I began, my voice steady, "a large, unauthorized event took place on my property, causing significant damage. The fees for the removal of the 48 vehicles left behind have been collected in full." I held up the check. The total came to $9,600. This money was born out of a lack of respect and a violation of boundaries, so I can think of no better, more fitting use for it than to support a group of men and women who have dedicated their lives to respecting and defending the boundaries of our great nation. I handed the check to the man from the Veterans Association. He shook my hand firmly, his eyes full of a gratitude that made me feel 10 feet tall. The reporter was smiling. It was a good story. A story about a wrong being made right. It was the final, public nail in the coffin of Victoria Sterling's reputation. The rest of the pieces fell into place quietly after that. My lawyer called a week later. Victoria, facing a mountain of evidence and a slate of potential criminal charges, had agreed to settle my civil suit out of court. The amount was more than generous, enough to cover every last damaged vine, repair the irrigation system, and upgrade the security on my property without my having to touch a penny of my own savings. Justice, it turned out, could be slow, but when it finally arrived, it paid well. Life on the ranch began to find its new rhythm. The scars on the land started to heal. With the settlement money, I hired a crew to help me replant the vineyard, their friendly chatter a welcome change from the angry shouts that had filled the air before. Liam Chen and the new HOA board were true to their word. There were no more letters, no more complaints. One Saturday, a neighbor I'd never even spoken to before dropped off a freshly baked pecan pie on my porch with a simple, handwritten note that said, "Thank you." A few months later, when the Texas heat had softened into the golden glow of autumn, Sheriff Marcus Brody stopped by. The new vines were in the ground, and the promise of a future harvest felt real again. We sat on the porch, the same porch where I had waited for the chaos to begin, and watched the sunset. We didn't talk much. We just shared a couple of cold beers in the comfortable silence of old friends. "It's been quiet out here lately, Jack," he said, looking out over my peaceful fields. "Yep," I said. "Quiet is good." He nodded toward my new front gate. It was a heavy-duty, custom-made steel gate, the kind you see on serious ranches. I'd had a new sign made for it, too. He chuckled as he read it. "Trespassers will be composted, huh? You're not messing around." I smiled. Just a friendly reminder. We sat there until the stars came out, bright and clear in the vast Texas sky. I came back here from the war looking for peace, and after a long and unexpected battle, I had finally found it. But I'd learned a hard lesson along the way. Peace isn't something you're just given. It's not a quiet harbor you can just sail into and drop anchor. It's a perimeter, it's a border, it's a fortress, and to keep it, you have to be willing to stand on the walls, watch the horizon, and defend it with everything you've got. Thank God. That was one fight I was trained to win.